real
Sure.
divide in America is not Republican or in Democrat. It's not conservative and liberal.
That's right.
Those were the old divides. The real divide in America is establishment versus anti-establishment.
Welcome to the Wayfinder Show with Louis Hernandez, where guests discuss the why and how of making changes that led them down a more authentic path or allowed them to level up in some area of their life. Our goal is to dig deep and provide not only knowledge, but actionable advice to help you get from where you are to where you want to be. Come join us and find the way to your dream life. Welcome back to the Wayfinder Show. I'm your host, Louis Hernandez, and today I am here with Kevin Howard. Kevin is a veteran, former FEMA loan officer, and business banker turned climate risk mitigation advocate. Raised in the Bronx and shaped by a career spanning disaster response and finance, Kevin now channels his passion for humanity and nature into Onward at Last, a compelling series of social commentaries challenging the very virtues that define modern life. Through deep reflection on freedom, self interest, and competition, Kevin explores how these ideals may be contributing to societal breakdown and what we can do to set a new course. He lives with his wife, Nicole, in the Columbia Gorge National Scenic Area of Oregon, and we're really excited to have him here. So, Kevin, welcome to the Wayfinder Show.
Indeed, Louis. Thank you so much for bringing me in today. I am so excited for this conversation.
Likewise, man. These are some interesting topics we're going to talk about that we usually don't get into, so I'm really excited about this. But before that, let's just get into you, man. Who are you? Where'd you come? Give us your origin story.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I am a second generation American. My mother, Andrea, was born and raised in Panama.
Oh, wow.
Spanish is her first language. She
I'm
grew up in,
Colombian. Sorry to
is that right?
I'm
See,
sorry to
small
interrupt.
world,
I'm like,
Louis,
wow, I didn't
small
even
world. No, no,
realize that. That's
no.
funny.
No
Yeah.
worries. She came here as a teenager to the States, and so her passion for America was a function of the fact that she grew up pre-Noriega, Panama,
Ah,
and so she understood what it was like to live outside of the country, grow up in a culture outside of the country, and that's all good. And she loves her country, her original country. But she became a naturalized U.S. citizen here, and she instilled in both me and my brother an appreciation for the opportunity we have growing up here, unlike the opportunity that many of her siblings grew up in Panama. And so that real focus on and real appreciation of the opportunities we have as Americans really informed my early life. And so right after graduating from high school, I joined the US Army and served in NATO. And now here's where I
wow.
date myself. I served during the end of the Cold War. President Reagan was my commander in chief, and Colin
Wow.
Powell was a lieutenant general running Fifth Corps, and I served for Colin Powell in Europe.
Wow.
And I served 4 years active duty. I was a first generation M1 tanker. My MOS, military occupational specialty, was as a nuclear biological chemical NCO. So I trained tankers how to survive in contaminated environments. And so after that, did undergrad in Texas, got my degree in economics, and then actually went to law school. And then after education, I served a full 1 year commitment as a FEMA lead disaster assistance loan officer, based primarily in Fort Worth, Texas, because we served for the Northridge earthquake. So this puts us in the 94, 95 range. And then after that experience, which was amazing, 25 years as a business banker, peaking during leading into the financial crash, where I was a middle market commercial banker at Wachovia when the music stopped in September of 2008. That was a different part of my journey. It took me 6 years. It took me, let's see, from 2009 to 2016 to get back into banking because a third of the banking industry got laid off during the financial crash. So I was out of banking for a while, doing insurance, doing whatever I could do to survive. But I did make it back. And ultimately, when I came back to banking in 2016, I was at this point I had become aware of the climate crisis. I was very much an environmentalist and stuff like that. And so I was a part of the recognition of climate risk as an actual vertical one risk within the risk management structure of US Bank, the bank I was working for. The US Bank is the fifth largest bank in America. And so when you add a new vertical one risk like credit risk or liquidity risk, to a bank, it's a major deal. And so climate was just getting recognized. And this is where I went back to school and got my sustainability and climate risk certification with the Global Association of Risk Professionals in order to advise a $600 billion bank. How do you manage this risk? So, taking that experience, ultimately, I started my own consulting business called Climate Changes Everything LLC, an Oregon-based business, and I advise local governments, counties, financial institutions on how they can manage their climate risk. So that's basically my story. Along the way, I grew up cradle Catholic, passionate in my faith, and that faith over time, as I discerned through my adulthood, transitioned into what I would call a spiritual journey, right?
Mm.
And I still am rooted in that faith, but the focus has shifted from religious ideology and the acceptance of a series of truths, of principles, to the pursuit of truth itself and what is true about our experience that helps us to understand our purpose here in this life. And by living that purpose, ultimately leads to our personal fulfillment. And so on that journey is when I started writing these social commentaries based on the things I was discovering through that journey. Finally, in December 2022, Atmosphere Press did me the honor of publishing my book of social commentaries called Onward at Last.
Nice.
And then, inspired by the 2024 presidential election, which played out so many of the issues that I had been talking about in my book, I did a new edition where I added a new chapter called America at the Crossroads and added 21 new commentaries because so many of the issues and the narratives that were playing out in the election demonstrated what I was speaking to earlier, which is that so many things that we are told. When I looked at when I looked at the truth that I had come to understand, most of that truth was through the wisdom of my lived experience and not the virtues, values, and narratives that we're told. So many of those things actually totally conflict with what we have learned to be true in our lives, and yet we believe them. And what that does is that creates a cognitive dissonance. It did so with me, in that if your beliefs don't align with how you actually live, there's a disconnect there. And it's really hard to find purpose and fulfillment when the things you believe don't align with the things that you actually do. And so that's why I wrote the book to identify that. And then this was playing out in the election, what the Democrats and what the Republicans were projecting, right? And the narratives that they were projecting was an exaggerated version of these distorted narratives, not designed to inform us, but to designed to manipulate us,
Right.
to get us to feel a certain way, to get us to be angry at each other, to get us to weaponize the very things that make us special and totally ignore the things that we actually share.
Hmm.
And so then I wrote this, I wrote 21 new commentaries, America at the Crossroads, and then Atmosphere Press published that new edition with a new foreword by John Fullerton, who's a brilliant former investment banker who started something called the Capital Institute,
Mm.
which he's trying to develop a new form of economics called regenerative economics. And so he wrote the foreword for the book, and that was published in October of
How'd you
2024.
get him? That's a big get.
Oh yeah, he we had crossed paths in that I took his regenerative economics course
Okay.
through his Capital Institute. No, it is a big get. He's a
Yeah.
member of the Club of Rome, one of these big thinkers and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And but no, he believed in the project. He read the book. He understood that I was speaking truth. In fact, he said in the Church of Finance I was a blasphemer, but he resonated with because I was revealing some truths about these lies that we're told. And so, yeah, so that's basically my story. I'm here to try to help people to remember who they are by dispelling so many of these things that are simply not true that fill our heads in terms of how we believe and how we see each other and how we understand the world. So hopefully we can talk about some of that too.
Yeah, I had some questions, but let's not hold back here. What are some of those lies that you've identified as?
Well, and they go back for a good period of time, but so playing out right now, a good example of what I'm talking about is let's take the war in Ukraine. Let's take the war in Ukraine.
Sure.
Okay. All right. When Russia attacked Ukraine in, was it March of 2022, what President Biden told us, and by the way, I'm a long time Democrat. I voted for Walter Mondale in '84 when almost no one else did. Right? So when
Yeah,
I was
well,
serving for,
we'll go
yeah.
back to
So
giving our own disclaimers on all that.
I just wanted to say this. So
Yeah,
I'm just not biased. So Joe
yeah,
Biden told the country that described Russia's attack on Ukraine as an unprovoked attack on a sovereign country. All right. And so a lot that opened the hearts of a lot of Americans. This became freedom against totalitarianism and that framework. And
right.
we have since offered over $100 billion in US support to try to defend Ukraine against Russia. Okay.
Yeah,
But if you just simply check the history of the events that led to Russia attacking Ukraine, and the reference point that I would give people is there's a gentleman there's a gentleman named, let's see, 1 second. Let me look up his name real quick. Is Jeffrey Sachs. He
oh,
is
Jeff Sachs. Yeah.
Jeffrey Sachs. He's a Columbia University economist, probably the leading developmental economist in our lifetime. He is who the United States sent to Eastern Europe to help the former Warsaw Pact countries in the 90s convert to capitalism. We sent him to Russia to help Boris Yeltsin and Mikhail Gorbachev convert Russia to a free market economy. This is the guy we sent.
Yeah.
He is also the principal contributor to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This guy is a giant above reproach. I what I'm about to tell you, the story I'm about to tell you about the war in Ukraine is what he has addressed to the European Parliament as recently as March of this year, telling the same story. They have pushed him off the news because they cannot say he's a liar. They cannot dispute his facts. But because he's the guy in the room. He, okay. So basically, okay, so here Biden, and leading into the election, the war in Ukraine, a big issue in the election of last year. Okay, we're told that it was an unprovoked attack, when actually this goes back to to when the Soviet Union decided to step down in the early 90s. And so here Gorbachev was working with George H.W. Bush to say, okay, we're going to release Eastern Europe, the Warsaw Pact. We're going to dismantle the Soviet Empire. We're going to pull all the nukes back to Russia and make sure they don't get in the hands of terrorists. We're going to abdicate communism, and we would like to help to establish a free market economy in Russia, right? We will do this. We will, in releasing Eastern Europe, we will support reunification of Germany. And we will support the reunification of Germany as a member of NATO. Our condition is this: one, we don't want NATO to expand east into Europe. And
Hmm.
why? Because the Warsaw Pact during the Cold War was a security buffer between Western Europe and Russia. If you look at all the historical conflicts, major conflicts between Europe and Russia, it comes from Western Europe attacking Russia. The Napoleonic Wars, it was France. World War One, it was Germany and Austria. World War Two, it was Germany. Okay, so to the deaths of millions of Russians. So that's why in the Cold War period, Eastern Europe was controlled by the Soviet Union as a security buffer against the West. So what Gorbachev was saying in 92 is that, okay, we will support the reunification of Germany, even though they were responsible for the deaths of over 20 million Soviet citizens in World War II. We will support the reunification, but NATO needs to agree not to expand east. That's exactly what James Baker, Secretary of State under H.W. Bush, promised. He did it in a private assurance. Now, that NATO would not advance 1 inch east of Europe. Okay. Then Bill Clinton promptly broke that private assurance by starting to expand in Eastern Europe by the late 90s. Going into the 2000s, we continued that expansion, right? In 2008, at the NATO summit, George W. Bush announced the intent to expand NATO all the way to include Ukraine. And Putin, who was in control of Russia at the time, put out a direct communique to US ambassador to Ukraine, saying that Russia would consider expanding NATO to include Ukraine as an existential threat to the national security of Russia because NATO forward positions nuclear weapons, like we have in Poland, Romania, and Turkey. So that was Putin notifying us in 2008. That would be considered an existential threat that Russia will go to war over and would go to nuclear war over to prevent. Okay. 2014, with a democratically elected Ukrainian government that was NATO neutral, that the Ukrainian constitution said that it would stay neutral, right? The United States provided the financing under Obama, right? Provided the financing for the violent overthrow of that democratically elected government. Jeffrey Sachs was in Ukraine in 2014 because the new government that we installed called him in to help establish a new economy that was independent of the Russians. And when he got on the ground there, he discovered that we had paid for the overthrow. Okay,
Mm.
this is when that new government then turned around and started killing ethnically Russian Ukrainians. Thousands of them, 15,000. That's when Russia intervened in Ukraine and took Crimea. Okay, by 2015, they have a peace agreement. And that peace agreement is sponsored by Germany, France, and Poland, and is approved by the US UN Security Council, including the United States. You know, that security agreement would have protected the sovereignty of Ukraine, kept it all together. And the only difference is that the ethnically Russian southeastern region of Ukraine would be protected against the Ukrainian government banning Russian language, banning Russian religion, banning Russian culture, which is what they were trying to do. Okay. The problem is, and that agreement is called a Minsk II agreement. The problem is the United States then turned around and instructed Ukraine not to enforce the agreement. Okay,
Right.
so here we go. So we're not enforcing the agreement. We paid for the violent overthrow. We have an anti-Russian government that we installed. The proof of that we installed it is an audio tape of Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State under Obama, admitting to the US ambassador to Ukraine that this is the government we're going to install after the overthrow. And that is the government who took power. That is the government who called Jeffrey Sachs. Okay. So between 2015 and 2021, the New York Times put in their front page how we start building secret military bases in Ukraine and bringing in weapons. This is when, in 2021, Russia put their military on the border of Ukraine. But they gave us one more chance. In December 2021, Putin sent a communique to the NATO Secretary General, and that says, we would like a conference on the security question relating to Ukraine. And NATO responded, and the Secretary General has admitted this publicly, responded to Putin's request in December 2021 that NATO, the business of NATO expansion is not anyone's business, including Russia, and that
Mm.
NATO would not discuss their expansion with Russia. This is the events that led up to Russia attacking Ukraine. It did
Oh,
not have to happen, right? It certainly wasn't unprovoked.
sure.
All this is easily verifiable. This is an entirely different story. This is not pro Putin. This is what actually happened. The truth is not ideological. It is what actually happened that led up to this event. And so this is just one strand. And if you can just look at the narrative that we're told, and what the actual truth of the matter is. It is so profoundly different that they would lie to us that profoundly. This is no different than WMDs in Iraq. This is
Right.
no, no
Right.
different. When you are willing to, when you have leadership who's willing to lie to their people to the point where hundreds of thousands of people are dead because of that lie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to dispel those type of narratives. And the only way we as people can reclaim our sovereignty is to understand what is true about the things that we're told that
Sure.
affect our lives. Because otherwise, this is why you vote for Kamala Harris, right? Because she's standing on the side of freedom, trying to protect the Ukrainians. But the fact of the matter is that this has nothing to do with Ukrainian sovereignty. Do you know that there's never been a Democratic vote in Ukraine in the last 20 years in
Mm,
support of in support of joining NATO? Even Zelensky ran his
right.
campaign. He ran to endorse and enforce the Minsk II agreements, which would have prevented Ukraine joining NATO. So that's
Mm,
what I'm saying. We are being lied to and manipulated, and we need to shed these lies in order for us to make choices that make sense for us and our businesses.
sure. Yeah, this particular election, I don't want to focus on the candidates here, okay? Or even
That's
the parties, if it's okay. But I can say like you, I think I have a very similar background in that, although I always consider myself an independent, if you really look at my voting record, the truth is I've almost always voted Democrat, with a couple of exceptions here or there. And luckily, I live in a state now of Colorado where I can declare myself independent and actually vote for whoever I want, which is great. But on the East Coast, it's like the decisions were made on the primary. So you just had to align yourself with the majority party, vote there, because that's where the real election was.
exactly.
But I'll tell you, I think this is a great example of things that, as much as we all think we're independent, because you talk to everybody, everybody says that everybody thinks they want to be fiscally conservative, socially liberal, right? Everybody thinks that they are independent minded, but at the end of the day, we vote one way 90% of the time, and we're not
Yeah.
really there. And there's something about the other side that gives us the heebie-jeebies, and we align ourselves with the party that's there. And I think that's what over time, as we maybe it's age, maybe it's just an awakening, maybe we had somebody who really did a great job with the messaging. I don't know, but we start to see some truths from the party that we're aligned with, and they all do it, right? That start to expose that, okay, maybe it isn't what my party's saying. I'll give another great example. Bernie.
Yeah.
Bernie is below, I like to call him the consciousness of the Democratic Party because for what it's worth. But anyways, people loved him, went on the road, people followed him like crazy. Him and AOC are starting to do that now again, and they're getting big crowds, which by the way, any any side that does that usually builds a big following, right? With whatever message. The Democratic Party felt threatened by that and they shut him down. And if you really start to look at it, we haven't had a real Democratic primary probably since Obama won the first
Yeah.
one. The more consciously I start to think about this, because a lot of my friends love Bernie, and I'm not saying I'm a Bernie supporter now or not, whatever. It's just I saw that all of a sudden he just got shut down. We saw it, and then we saw it really clearly in this election, right? Where we all voted for one guy and then we got somebody else, right? So it's like, and then you see that one guy, we didn't want to believe that he may not have been stable. And then we see him on TV and okay, he's not stable. So it's like you start to see the lies for real. And it's like, how do you deny that? You have to start asking the questions consciously.
Yeah, it's so important. And I'm so happy you bring up Bernie because to me, Bernie Sanders is a wonderful, from a Democratic or a progressive perspective, example of the real divide in America. The real
Sure.
divide in America is not Republican or in Democrat. It's not conservative and liberal.
That's right.
Those were the old divides. The real divide in America is establishment versus anti-establishment. And by
Yes.
that,
Well put.
that I mean is Bernie Sanders appeal. He was talking about a political revolution. And the reason why Bernie Sanders was talking about a political revolution is that the geopolitical and geoeconomic policies of the neoliberal, neoconservative project, which is two sides of the same coin. So, that geopolitical policy of American hegemony, one superpower in the post Cold War period, right? And that American hegemony would be supported by the forever wars. we would be fighting across the globe. And look at us for the last 30 years. Look at our federal debt. We had $4 trillion in debt in 92. We
Yeah.
got 37 trillion today. Why? Because we fought wars for almost the entire time. And there's that New York
There it
accent, the
is. I
wars.
heard it. I was going to say that.
It's
It's
okay. So the geopolitical policy of the neoliberal, neoconservative agenda was American hegemony, one superpower, right?
yeah.
The economics was globalization.
Yeah.
Globalization. It started with Clinton with NAFTA and the whole nine yards. They liberalized GATT and stuff like that, so that American corporations could then go labor shopping around the globe for the best, lowest cost labor, right?
Hmm.
And what that did to American domestic labor is it commoditized them. It made them compete against South Korea. It made them compete against Mexico. It made them compete against China. So what happened to wages in the United States? They stayed flat for 30 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So the anti-establishment is the abandoned middle class and working class Americans
That's right.
who did not get served by globalization. Who won in globalization? The professional class and the big and wealth. We produced the wealthiest billionaire class in global history. One of these uber wealthy billionaires, like Elon Musk, has more money adjusted for inflation than the entire Gilded Age.
Yeah.
The Rockefellers, the Mellons, that's how much wealth we created at the top, at
Yeah.
the expense. The Federal Reserve said in 2021 that for the first time in US history, the top 1% have more wealth and income than the entire American middle class.
Yeah.
Who voted for Trump? Who voted for Bernie? The working class and middle class Americans who got left behind, right?
That's
And
right.
the problem with what the Democrats did by snuffing Bernie twice is that they really thought that these working class people would buy into the hype that they are the party of the working person. Clinton changed that. They are the party of Wall Street and
Right.
forever wars and
Right.
all, and that includes Obama. So what did these people do? They didn't go vote for Hillary. They turned around and started voting for Trump.
Yeah.
Why? Because they let a billionaire frame himself. He's a marketing guy.
Totally.
That's all he does.
He
He
gets it.
framed
Yeah.
himself as the anti-establishment guy
Yeah.
and goes to Michigan and talks about how he's bringing these jobs back.
Hmm.
Okay, so no matter the fact that he's a billionaire and benefited from all that, they deferred. He understood, he read the electorate and
Yeah.
understood that most Americans are not served by this economics. So what does that make 2024? That's America's Brexit. The reason why the UK
Mm.
voted to leave the European Union is domestic middle class and labor and working class people did not get served by the European Union, only the professional class and wealth. Same thing that happened in America. This trend is not unique. Louis, my friend, for the first time in global history, every major democracy across the global north, from Japan to Canada, throughout Europe, voted out incumbents
Mm.
because the majorities are not served by globalization. Only wealth in the professional class. So this is what drove the election. It was less about Trump and a complete repudiation of neoliberalism. If Kamala Harris had the character, and I say character because they asked her many times, is there anything you could think of that you would do different than Joe Biden?
Yeah.
If she had the strength of character to step out there and say yes, people would have been open to that. But people
Absolutely.
were not going to affirm a policy that doesn't serve them. So it became a rejection, a repudiation of the incumbent, just like it was across the world.
Sure. I think there's been several elections in my lifetime where the anti-establishment candidate won, and it was really, and then they take power and they become the rule because they become the ruling class. They become the establishment, and that goes on usually for a few cycles, right? I think Reagan, Clinton, Obama, now Trump. I believe those are probably four in my lifetime that were anti-establishment victories, their first wins, right? Like we can disagree or not, but how does with that in mind, how do we get that to happen more often so we don't have an establishment a new establishment that continues a self-serving status quo for them rather than the masses, right? The
Well,
middle class and the working class.
The interesting thing, and this is what I would say to you, Louis, and to the audience listening. This is the thing that separates, and I am not a Trump supporter,
Sure.
but this is what separates Trump from everyone else you just said. His motivation, why as a billionaire does he choose to take the mantle of the anti-establishment? And the reason why is even though he is a product of the patriarchy, he is a
Sure.
product of the establishment, they have never accepted him as a
That's right.
respected member of their class. And I think the turning point was in 2000, was it 2011, 2012, during the Obama administration at the White House Correspondents'
I
Dinner.
saw that. I saw that.
Yes, when Obama
Yeah.
was on stage roasting Trump, who's in the
Yeah.
crowd, and
Yeah.
he eviscerated and totally trivialized
Yeah.
his career as on the Apprentice and stuff like that,
That's right.
relative to a president and the choices that the president has to make. And this, I think something snapped in Trump
Yeah.
sitting in that audience because he is a narcissist,
Absolutely.
when she
They
said,
all are.
okay, fine. Yeah, fine. I will never be accepted by these people. So I'm going to be president. And when I'm president, I'm going to dismantle what they've done. And this is the difference between, that's why I'm saying this is different. And why this could be good from the perspective of people who were not served by the economics and the geopolitics of the last 30 years, right? Is that if you look at what he's trying to do, the significance of Tulsi Gabbard, Trump literally went to the center last August during the Democratic convention. The Democrats are anointing Kamala. He reaches out to RFK Jr., another centrist Democrat. Elon Musk is a centrist Democrat. Look at
Hmm.
their history, their background, everything they've stood for, everything they supported before, all the candidates they paid for. Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii. The Democratic Party in Hawaii is centrist to liberal, and that's a deep tradition out there, right? She
That's right.
comes up in it. He appointed her to be the director of national intelligence because the methodology for enforcing American hegemony was to funnel money, billions, ultimately trillions of dollars, through USAID to finance counterinsurgencies that destabilized governments, that then we could flood the zone with weapons for the benefit of the military industrial complex.
Sure.
And so this is what created all the wars. This is what we did in Ukraine. Okay, he hired Tulsi Gabbard because her claim, the reason why Hillary ran her out of the Democratic Party is because she opposes this type of activity. She wants to end the forever wars.
Yeah.
And so he did. If there's a woman listening to this who's looking for a woman in power, who actually comes from that divine feminine, who's not just trying to emulate Henry Kissinger, that's Tulsi Gabbard. He put
Hmm.
her in one of the most powerful positions to end our use and our funneling of our treasury to cause these conflicts around the world. And that's what she spoke about in her confirmation hearing. You can hear all the details. And that's why the establishment hates her, is because she's trying to cut off the money train. Okay. Putting RFK at HHS,
Same
right?
thing.
Both the pharmaceutical industry and big food, right, have the fortunes that they have made while American health has continued to decline
Right.
over decade after decade. COVID proved the magnitude of our unhealthiness
Totally.
is that 25% of the COVID deaths were because of our comorbidities when we only have what, less than 5% of the global population. So just
Kevin, if anybody ever goes travel anywhere else in the world, you'll see it right away. Because all these reactions we have to food that we have almost become numb to it, that we just take it. Oh, that's just the way it is. We're supposed to feel like crap after having a burger. No, we're not. And you go have a burger. I was in Japan in 24 early, and I remember I was training for something. I had a burger in a while. Finally had one after my event, and then I had one. It felt great. It was delicious. Felt great. All this stuff. Then I get back to the States. I'm at LAX. I see another burger stand. It's a fancy gourmet, healthy, whatever. I eat it, and I'm like dying the rest of the day. This is disgusting. So it doesn't
yeah.
take much. Just go try, and then you got to start questioning why is it that the same thing I'm eating here is not having the impact that I would have back home?
No,
You
that's
ask
right.
that question, it just blows your mind. What are we doing in the states?
But this is why it's critical. This is at the heart of my book. It's critical for us to make, in order for each of us to make decisions that can positively impact our lives.
Yeah.
That whether it's running our businesses or making our personal choices, we have to know what is true
Yeah.
about what we're told so that we can make informed choices. What we're being told, the magnitude of the lies that we're being told totally are detached from reality. And they're designed to get us to do things that actually hurt ourselves, including, again, the food that we eat, right? We're getting down to a point where if you don't buy local, if you don't have any type of relationship with the people producing your food, you
Mm.
need to call into question whether you're eating poison. And I
Right.
don't mean like arsenic poison, the kind of poison that in 10 years now you're obese and suffering from all these comorbidities that's going to lead to your death in some other unrelated way. So it,
Then
it
how
is
so how do
horrible.
we find the truth, Kevin? How do we find the
Well,
truth?
the benefit is we live in the age of information.
Yes.
And all I'm saying here is everyone has most people have smartphones, most people have the internet. As we need to move past this idea of this is a trusted source of information, so I don't have to check, or this is a person in responsibility, I don't have to check. From now on, make it a practice. If it's going to involve how you make your decisions and the basis by which you make your decisions. Verify that it's true.
Sure.
Simple Google searches start to do this. What is the history that led up to this moment? Is it true? With the advent of AI, I had the most fascinating discovery with Chat GPT. You
Mhm.
could use Chat GPT to verify these stories by asking it, is that really true? Does the data, does the information you have support that statement? And take any statement, any classic statement, like Admiral Kirby announcing that South Africa's case of genocide against Israel is baseless and without merit. That's what he said as the spokesperson for the National Security Council for President Biden. Okay. Then the International Court of Justice rules that actually the evidence supports the fact that they are committing genocide. How can it be baseless and without merit? So the thing is, check. There, in any way, based on your own individual resources, if it's a decision that is going to impact your life, before you just believe what you were told, make sure it's true, and then adjust accordingly. Make that a part of your practice.
Do you find that a lot of these sources, even Google, are biased? I
Oh,
find,
you're
yeah.
You're right. Here's the thing. The reason why it's not an easy thing when lying became normal, it's not easy to find the truth in that respect, but it is easy to find it. That's what the funny thing about it is the only way the lie works is if you simply accept it for what it is, right? But the more you triangulate the lie that you're trying to check or the statement that you're trying to check, you're going to find it's not the same thing as you're being told. And that's then, and when you just like in anything else in your life, you find out, oh, that's not how I was told. Then you dig a little deeper and you dig a little, okay. So in the process of checking what we're told, I know this has been my practice. You will perfect who actually tells you the truth. You will
Mm.
perfect the process of validating from 12 different sources because the internet and AI is that powerful. Make that a part of your practice. That is an essential skill until we can change our normal culture to get back to a place where we don't lie to each other as a matter of business as usual. And that's the tragedy. That's where we are. So, that was how I would recommend.
Yeah.
People do and can figure it out. It's no different than, okay, I need to buy a car. I have this much in my budget. How would you go about doing that? It's the same thing. Whatever the story is, do your investigation like you were going to make a major purchase, and then do what makes sense once you find out if it's true. And if you find out when it's not true, what is the implications of the person just looking you in the eye and telling you something that is so diametrically opposed to what actually happened? And that's the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
That's genocide in Gaza.
Yeah.
That is so many different things. So many,
Yeah. Kevin, this is the kind of episode I've often thought about. I admire my counterparts like Joe Rogan or Lex Friedman who go on for a 3 hour interview. And you're the kind of guest that we would want to have that kind of long form episode with, but we're not there yet. Unfortunately, I still have another
I hear
career.
you, my friend.
So I'm going to have to shift over to our Wayfinder 4 questions for now, if that's all right. So if you can
Sure,
just give
sure.
us a hack, a life hack that you use every day that you can share with our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, I've already given away the lead on this one.
Yeah.
The hack that I use, I seriously, is I verify the information I'm told before. In other words, I'm guided by the truth. And it really is a superpower because
Yeah.
once you eliminate the false information, you're going to find that most of your competitors, most of the people making the choice, unfortunately, are misguided by the false information. Like I said, it is a competitive advantage if you could verify what you're told, make sure it's true, and then make the best decision that you could make based on that information.
Yeah.
Organize your life based on that information. It is an absolute hack for what's going on.
Yeah. How
Yeah.
about a favorite? Just a show, podcast, book, activity,
Yeah.
whatever you, just a favorite thing you
One
like
of
to
my
do.
favorites, okay, I so many of those categories, but based on how the flavor of this, I'm going to shift it up a little bit. There's a documentary it's available on Netflix, and it is done by Sir David Attenborough, and it is called A Life on Our Planet. And this brings in the climate side of it. And it's an amazing documentary in that it spans David Attenborough's, and he released it like October of 2020 during COVID, right? It spans his life of bringing the wild to us. And he shows how the percentage of the planet that is wild, that is untouched, has diminished over the course of his life to the point where it's getting critically low. But he does this to try to demonstrate what impact our modern lifestyle is having on the planet. But then he turns around and he talks about the positive. He doesn't just leave us with the problem. And he takes us to Chernobyl. So I'm not going to steal the thunder because it's amazing how he shows the
Yeah, no,
story.
we'll check it out.
Yeah. So
A Life on Our Planet by
a
Sir
life
David
on our planet,
Attenborough. Great.
and
Excellent. How about a piece of advice for our younger self?
I thought a long time about this question, and the reason why is that my answer is I would not approach my younger self. I know I've heard this people
Mm.
ask this so many times, but I would not tell my younger self any of the benefit of the experience that we would have gained had they not met me as my older self. Because I don't want that younger self to change anything they did. Why? Because we learned so much from that process. And then we would not be who we are today. And I want the best thing I could do for my younger self. And this is not about ego. This is about doing the internal work. The best thing I could do for my younger self is allow him to become who we became. That's ultimately an aspiration. Now, if I was ashamed of who I am, this is an easy question. No, I work hard to be in this space.
I love that.
And that's involving taking some sober looks in the mirror.
I love that.
Believe me.
I was listening to an interview with Morgan Housel, who wrote The Psychology of Money, and he talked about billionaire. He's known a lot of billionaires. He studied them. He wrote the book on how they think and everything. And he said that there's like an evolution where they all know that they all want to buy the big house when they made it, right? And so they go and buy the big house. And along that time, they realize that they don't like the big house. It's the thing. And so then there's another evolution where you go from having a big house, a yacht, all that, to then just getting rid of it all and simplifying your life again. And the point of that is exactly what you just said. There's something to they all know it. These are some of the smartest, well read people in the world, incredibly successful. They know they shouldn't do it, but they have to do it anyways and experience it. And I think sometimes you're absolutely right. It doesn't matter what advice we get, we know it, but we're not going to take it. We got to do it ourselves, experience it.
You got to go through it. You got to learn the lesson yourself, and then you
Yeah.
can
So
become what you can be. Yes.
totally. So that's a great answer. So last one, how about a big opportunity or a limiting belief?
Yeah. This is a great question. And the thing about it is the limiting and to identify the limiting belief exposes the big opportunity. So, what's the limiting belief? I believe that the virtues, values, and narratives of our culture in the United States specifically, because this is the culture I know, right, have effectively obscured us from who we are. When you think of independence, freedom, self-interest, competition as the measuring sticks for building a successful life, these are at the core of what it is to be an American. The problem is that those four virtues, particularly how they have been expressed over the last 40, 50 years, right? They convince us of things that are simply not true based on our lived experience. So the limiting belief is that I can advance my interests without considering Louis.
Mm.
That what is better for me and my family, notwithstanding what that does to Louis, is fine as long as we both do this fair and square. Right. When in fact, I don't survive without your contribution and the contributions of thousands of people, I will never know. I don't produce the food that I eat. I don't produce the clothes that I wear. I don't produce
Hmm.
the air that I breathe. I
Hmm.
don't produce this technology that allows us to talk, right? By convincing me of my independence, and that I can advance my own, I can actually benefit from only thinking about myself and my interests. It obscures the fact that I am a part, we are interdependent on each other, not codependent,
Yeah.
interdependent. There's a symbiotic relationship between me and you, my friend, and us and the rest of society, and us and the natural environment that sustains us. And by ignoring that, it induces us to do what? Create the climate crisis. It induces us to create wealth and income inequality. It
Yeah.
induces us to create all these challenges, existential now challenges. And until we remember, the big opportunity is remembering that we are interdependent, and that's our strength. This is how we defeated the dinosaurs because we cooperated. This is how, okay, this is the superpower opportunity. We need to remember who we are. We are interdependent, and that's a good thing. Nothing in nature lives independently.
Man, I absolutely love that answer. It is, we can have a whole episode just on that. And I had some questions around some of that for, because I know you write a lot about that too. And I'm a kind of, it just means we got to have another episode because that was
Hey, I'm
good.
all for it, Louis. I'm all
You
for it,
know?
particularly if you want to do the Roganesque and go for it. We could do
Oh man, yeah. I got to carve out a lot of time for that.
that's
The
right. Joe doesn't have to have all the fun.
That's right. That's right. Man, that was so profound. I first of all, I gotta say, just the way you started that, to identify the limiting belief exposes our big opportunities. I wrote that down. I am probably gonna, that is so deep. And that's actually why I asked that question together. I've just never been able to synthesize it the way you did in that statement. That is beautiful. And I thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And then the whole point about interdependence versus competition, I think our listeners know I'm a marathon runner. And I'm a
There we go.
competitive guy. I like to
Yeah.
consider myself a competitive guy. But ask anybody who really likes running marathons. First of all, they're probably a little sick in the head, right? It's not really joyful. But how do you get through it? At first, you train hard. First of all, there's a lot of teammates with that. We all love each other. We support each other, all that.
Yes.
It's like we really feel great for each other. When I feel so happy, I'm getting chills just thinking about my
Yeah.
teammates when they run and they get a PR and all that, just as much as my
That's
own,
right.
right? But oftentimes, a lot of us, we've talked about on our runs how at the end, what gets you through the end, like past the big wall, it's
Yeah.
seeing that person that's right there struggling next to you and grabbing them and saying, come on, let's get there together. We can do this. And you get there, and at the end, it's just like this bond. It's just, and you did it. And there's no competition there. It's an interdependence getting there to the end. And it is way, way more satisfying, a much better feeling than winning that race, I think. And I've heard this from people who win races, right?
Yeah.
Kivleski, who was one of America's best runners, he talked about it in one of his books. It is a real trait that we don't push in our society, but makes us feel incredibly good. So I thank you for bringing that up. That is a very profound thought.
I appreciate that, Louis. And I just want to say, as it relates to each of those virtues, it's not like there's no application.
Right.
It's just that the way we apply them. So, in the case of competition, is a survival technique,
Of
and
course.
appropriately so. In a context where there's not enough for me and you, the best way for us is to compete in order to get it, as opposed to just brute force. Okay.
Yeah.
But when there is enough for both of us, this should not be the means by which people access healthcare. This should
Yeah.
not be the means by which people access food. Otherwise, it becomes a blood sport. That's what we have in America, where
Yeah.
most of the it's us versus them, haves versus have-nots, and yet the have-nots are essential. Didn't we learn that during COVID? That the
Totally.
lowest paid people in society are the essential workers? That's insane.
It is.
So this is how we defeat ourselves. This is a misapplication of an otherwise good concept.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's
Yeah.
about finding that
Excellent.
balance, my friend.
So, Kevin, If people want to know more about you, find your essays, where can they find you?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. On my website is www.onwardatLast.com, onwardatLast.com. And on there, you not only get a preview of my book, Onward at Last, it's not for, and it's coming in, it's in hardcover, paperback, ebook, and the audio book by this wonderful actress, Carolyn Jania, and stuff like that. But if you can't afford to buy the book, the commentaries are available in the blog tab.
Okay.
All of them are available in the blog tab, the Universal Oneness blog. And it's right there on the same website. But yeah, the purchase links are there if you want to purchase the book or purchase a version, or if you just want to access the commentaries. That's it.
Awesome. Kevin, I was a little nervous about this one because, like I said, I haven't gotten into any political, quote unquote, controversial stuff, but this has been a lot of fun. And it's been something I wanted to move into a little bit more just to get people to think. And thank you for helping me go in this direction and making it comfortable. And I hope people really enjoy it and they go think and they check out your stuff and think on a deeper level about what the truth is.
Louis, thank you so much for a thoughtful conversation.
Yeah,
Yes, the thing about third rails is you could, if you're heart centered with your
that's it.
approach,
Yeah.
you could touch the third rail. It's going to be all right.
All right.
And I think we did okay today.
Yeah. Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed the Wayfinder Show. If you got value from this episode, please take a few seconds to leave us a 5-star rating and review. This will allow us to help more people find their way to live more authentic and exciting lives. We'll catch you on the next episode.